Use the Mobalytics pregame function to get a competitive edge over your opponents and mentally adjust your playstyle as needed for the upcoming games that you're about to play. It lets you know things like if your opponent is on a win streak, or even if it's their first time playing that specific champion. Master Yi has always been a hated champion at lower ranks. He's a very straightforward champion that can essentially 1v5 your entire team. And recently, a Master Yi boosting strategy has come into popularity throughout every single region. I'm sure some of you have seen it. It's where Master Yi simply goes into mid lane and takes his laner's farm. This strategy was originally an elo boosting strategy in the Chinese server. It's extremely effective at getting one person incredibly fed. The idea of the strategy is pretty simple. Play Master Yi jungle, play a support either top or mid lane, and then have Master Yi farm mid lane and the jungle. This way he will pretty much always double the enemy jungler's farm. One of Master Yi's biggest weaknesses is the early game. When you have a support that basically helps you and babies you through the early game, you're gonna get fed almost no matter what. A lot of people have difficulty dealing with this strategy, even to the point where some people are demanding that Master Yi get nerfs. Here's the thing, this is an elo boosting strategy, so of course it's going to be really effective against the masses because it's an unorthodox strategy. When you play this strategy against players who don't know what they're doing, you're almost guaranteed to win. However, if you play this strategy into a certain playstyle, you are almost always certainly going to lose as well. So how do you deal with this Master Yi elo boosting? Let's break down what this essentially is first. In elo boosting, the goal is to get yourself so fed that you can 1v5. Sometimes unlucky or unfortunate things happen to the point where you can't get yourself fed. What this strategy essentially is they're sacrificing a laner to guarantee a fed Master Yi. Most of the time it's going to be a Taric in the mid lane, and the only point of Taric is to make sure that Master Yi stays alive a little bit longer. By not having a true mid laner or a true mage, there are a lot of weaknesses that come with that team composition. So let's begin with the early game. What should you be doing in the early game? As a mid laner, you have to respect that Master Yi's gonna come to your lane. It's going to happen. 100% he's going to show up at your lane at around 2 minutes. So as a mid laner, you have one of two options. Either hard push the first wave, or try and freeze it. If you can, try to prioritize damage onto Taric. Taric is not a laner, Taric is a support. And without another player in lane, Taric is a pretty useless champion. He is incredibly abusable when it comes to lane. So during this early time when Master Yi is taking his first camp and his first buff, you can do whatever you want against this Taric. Now let's say the minion wave is not in a good position. Let's say that it's pushing towards his side and you can't get it to unfreeze. Here's the good news. Because Master Yi is trying to get as much farm as possible, every time he shows up mid lane, he is only going to be pushing the lane. He doesn't care to make you miss a few minions, he's just trying to get himself more minions. And so what Master Yi and Taric are often going to do is they're just going to use their resources to shove the wave as hard as possible. If Taric uses his stun on minions, you have a window of opportunity to harass and poke out Master Yi and Taric. Again, remember, this is an elo boosting strategy, so your safety and your own life comes first. If you can deny or delay the Master Yi snowball, you are making sure that this strategy does not go through. As a mid laner, do not get impatient for ganks. Do not spam ping your jungler for ganks. The reason being is because usually the jungler will have so many more better options than just ganking mid lane. While getting a mid laner's farm and your own farm is basically a dream to Master Yi, it is at the same time, in a sense, a dream for the other jungler as well. If a jungler is spotted on the maps at all times, he is basically never going to be able to get a real gank off. That is the biggest weakness of this strategy. So long as you're paying attention to where Master Yi is, you can know where he's going to be at all times. He exits from mid lane and you can figure out what side of the map he's going to go to. One thing that Master Yi players love to do is they love to invade and take your first red buff. This is because if you get caught out with Taric and Master Yi, you're pretty much always going to die. So usually the better option is not to contest this red buff, but rather to send your jungler and go take the enemy red buff instead. If you know that the enemy jungler is currently sitting mid lane trying to push minions, that means you can go into his own jungle and take his wolves, take his Gromp. You can easily set up a path into his jungle and get yourself ahead. But the best part obviously, is that there are no counter ganks when it comes to Master Yi mid. This strategy involves bot lane and top lane not having a jungler for the first 10 minutes of the game. Very rarely will Master Yi actually gank another lane, and if he does, he's almost always going to bring Taric along with him. So it becomes incredibly obvious when they're going for a gank on another lane. As a jungler, you don't even have to counter gank for that lane. Simply sit on the opposing side of the jungle and camp the shit out of the opposing lane. When a lane falls behind, usually they require jungle attention to get back into the game. But because Master Yi is so busy farming jungle and mid lane, he doesn't have time to get his other lanes back into the game. One thing you can do as a laner is simply pick a champion that will give you a free lane. You don't really have to deal with the jungler this game. You can pretty much perma-shove and perma-push as much as you want without fear that you're going to get punished for it. When you get your own lanes ahead, they are then able to maintain their leads because the enemy jungler isn't going to be ganking them. When they have a lead and when they can push in and have lane priority, they can then respond to the pressure that Master Yi is going to be putting elsewhere on the map. One thing that Master Yi does all the time is he will invade your second red buff with Taric. In a 2v2, they will pretty much never lose against the jungler and his mid laner. The only way you can turn the tide is if you can get your bot lane or top laner to join them. And the best way to do that is to give them ganks and to make sure that they are ahead before this happens. As a jungler, it is also fairly important that you take as much of your own farm as possible. This is because Master Yi is going to try to invade and take your farm at any time he can. When you're playing as a mid laner, remember that if Taric is by himself, Master Yi is probably not that far behind. You shouldn't think of them as two separate champions. They are basically just two parts of one champion. Taric is not the team's support, Taric is Master Yi's support. Now, it is not impossible to gank mid lane before level 6. But it is heavily dependent on what champion your mid laner is playing and how the Master Yi and the Taric players are playing. If you go in for a straight 2v2, you're probably not going to win it. However, Master Yi and Taric are just focused on pushing, so they will use all their resources to just kill minions and shove the wave as fast as possible so Master Yi can go get more farm. If you wait out their cooldowns and wait out their resources, this lane does become gankable. The goal of these ganks is not to get your mid laner fed, as for the most part, he's just going to be trying to stay alive. The goal is to get yourself ahead so that you can get the other two lanes ahead. At level 6, what Master Yi is always going to do is he's going to try and dive you in the mid lane. This is because Taric ultimate plus his shield and his heal will basically guarantee that Master Yi is not going to die. So what you can do as a jungler at this point is try to hover around mid lane, and when he actually does go for a dive, surprise him and take him out. Here's something that you have to accept when playing against Master Yi mid. You have to accept that he's going to get fed. Even if he doesn't get kills, he will still be further ahead than anyone else on your team. That's what happens when someone gives up their lane for their jungler. It guarantees he's going to be strong. Remember that Taric is a very important part of Master Yi's power. Most regular Master Yi players will buy 1 or 2 damage items and then buy some tanky items in order to survive the team fight a little bit longer. Because the elo boosting version of Master Yi has Taric to keep him alive, he doesn't need to worry about tanky items, and he usually just goes full damage in order to shred and 2-shot the backline. So rather than only trying to get picks onto Master Yi, it actually makes a lot of sense to get a pick on Taric first instead. Yeah, Master Yi will still have a lot of damage items, but he will be incredibly squishy as well because he doesn't have his support protecting him. So when you kill Taric first in a teamfight, you are minimalizing the effect of a Master Yi by an enormous amount. Don't think about killing Taric like, oh, we shouldn't focus the support. When you kill Taric, you're basically stripping away protection items from Master Yi. Now, assuming that mid did not feed too hard and you got your other lanes ahead, what should you and your team be doing against this strategy? This is a bronze elo boosting strategy that can work potentially at challenger and master tier. So in order to beat bronze, you gotta play like a bronze. You need to get everyone on your team and ARAM it down mid lane. A lot of times, Master Yi and Taric will just try to split push. The reason is because at this point of the game, when he has this much farm, this many items, and a Taric backing him up, Master Yi will 2v2 anyone. Master Yi will also win several 2v3s even. But here's the thing, because Master Yi spent all this time and all these resources getting himself ahead, his other teammates are basically deadweights at this point. So yes, 2v2 or 1v2 or 1v3, Master Yi is the strongest single champion in the game. However, when it comes to a 5v5, your team will likely still be stronger. This version of Master Yi still has weaknesses that the old Master Yi had as well. If Taric ults too late, he can still get bursted out by assassins. He can still be affected by CC and he can still be locked up and picked out. It's very important that you all group down mid lane because you don't really want to fight in the jungle against a Master Yi. The reason is because jungle fights are rarely ever true 5v5 fights. Usually speaking, they end up being small skirmishes around the jungle. Not every member of your team will be fighting the enemy team at the same time. You want to do this as much as possible because as a 5v5 team, you'll have more burst, you'll have more peel, and you'll have more crowd control for the Master Yi. You want the Master Yi to come and try to defend his turrets. Master Yi is not meant for sieging, he is meant to engage and he is meant to try and kill your backline. By having him at his turret, you're putting him at his weakest. If Master Yi decides not to try and come defend his turrets, simply take his turrets, take his inhibitor, and if his team tries to stop you, dive his teammates. The teammates that are actually defending are usually going to be the top laner and the bot laners. Because they didn't get any jungle attention, usually they are going to be really behind and they're going to have a really hard time defending 3v5. In conclusion, while this strategy works wonders in lower elos, at the end of the day, all it is a cheese strat. And no matter how good your cheese strategy is, there are always going to be glaring weaknesses with it. And this one is rooted in selfishness. A champion that's taking his laner's farm and not giving back to his other lanes. Thanks for watching. Thank you so much to the Patreons who support this channel. Special thanks to Maya81, WaywardSparks, and Milkshakes. If you'd like to support the channel, you can also check out one of my sponsors. Like, share, subscribe. That's it. Bye!